Your husband is having an affair with a dead woman. I froze. It felt like every drop of blood drained from my body, my icy hands gripping the armrest of the chair. Whoa, what? My voice shook, barely escaping my lips. The detective calmly slid a thick envelope across the table. When I opened it, photographs spilled out one by one. My husband, hand in hand, gazing with burning affection at a young, beautiful woman. That woman was none other than the new neighbor who had just moved in not long ago. But what made my heart stop was the final note at the bottom of the file. She had died 2 years ago. Hello, everyone. If you think you know where this story is going, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, the truth I uncovered was more twisted than I could have ever imagined, and it changed my life forever. Let me take you back to the beginning. 3 months before my picture-perfect suburban life began to unravel because of one seemingly harmless new neighbor. I should have known something was off from the very beginning. After 15 years of marriage to Michael, I thought I knew every expression that crossed his face, every habit, every tell. We lived in Westchester County, New York, in a colonial house with white picket fences and gardens that I'd spent years perfecting. Michael worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm in Manhattan, making enough money that I could stay home and focus on our interior design business. Our life looked perfect from the outside. Sunday barbecues with neighbors, couples game nights, annual trips to the Hamptons. I was the wife who remembered everyone's birthdays, organized the neighborhood watch meetings, and always had fresh cookies cooling on the windowsill when Michael came home from work. But perfection, I learned, is often just a beautiful lie we tell ourselves. The change started subtly in March when Jennifer Walsh moved into the house next door. She was everything I wasn't, mid-30s with long auburn hair, perfectly toned from what she claimed was daily yoga, and effortlessly stylish in that way that suggested money without trying too hard. She introduced herself over the fence one Saturday morning while I was planting tulips. "I hope we'll be great neighbors," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone in the community." Michael happened to be washing his car in the driveway when she came over. I watched him straighten up, suddenly conscious of his appearance in a way I hadn't seen in years. He sucked in his stomach slightly and ran a hand through his graying hair. "Welcome to Maple Street," he said, his voice carrying a warmth I rarely heard anymore when he spoke to me. "I'm Michael Patterson, and this is my wife, Ashley." The way Jennifer's eyes lingered on Michael made something cold settle in my stomach. But I pushed the feeling away. I was being paranoid. This was just normal neighborly friendliness. Except it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, Michael's behavior shifted in ways so subtle that anyone else might have missed them. But after 15 years of marriage, I noticed everything. He started taking longer showers and using cologne again, the expensive Tom Ford bottle that had been gathering dust in our medicine cabinet since our honeymoon. He began working out in our garage gym, something he hadn't done consistently in 5 years. When I complimented his renewed dedication to fitness, he just shrugged and said something about wanting to feel better about himself. The real red flag came when he started volunteering for neighborhood duties he'd previously avoided like the plague. Michael, who had spent years complaining about homeowners association meetings, suddenly became interested in community service. He volunteered to help Jennifer set up her garden sprinkler system. He offered to recommend a good tree service when she mentioned concerns about the oak in her backyard. "Since when do you care about neighborhood gardens?" I asked one evening as he headed out with his toolbox. "I'm just being helpful," he said, not meeting my eyes. "She's new to the area. It's the neighborly thing to do." But it was more than neighborly. I could see it in the way he checked his appearance in the hallway mirror before heading next door. The way he hummed while getting dressed on Saturday mornings. The way his phone was suddenly always face down on nightstands and counters. The final straw came on a Tuesday evening in April. I had made his favorite dinner. Pot roast with garlic mashed potatoes, the same meal I'd been perfecting since we were newlyweds. But Michael barely touched it, pushing food around his plate while glancing repeatedly at his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said quickly. "Just tired." But I knew it wasn't exhaustion. It was the distraction of a man whose mind was elsewhere. When his phone buzzed with a text message, I watched his face light up in a way it hadn't for me in years. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If you're enjoying this story and wondering what I discovered, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Your support means everything, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. My childhood of always coming second. To understand why Michael's betrayal cut so deep, you need to know about my childhood. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania as the middle child between two high-achieving siblings. My older brother Jake was the star athlete who got a full scholarship to Penn State. My younger sister Emma was the artistic prodigy whose paintings hung in the local gallery by age 12. And then there was me, Ashley, the forgettable middle child who tried desperately to find something that would make my parents notice me the way they noticed my siblings. I threw myself into academics, earning straight A's through high school, but Jake's football trophies always took center stage in our living room. I learned to cook and bake, hoping family dinners would become opportunities for connection. But conversations always centered around Emma's latest art prize or Jake's college prospects. When I started dating Michael in college, I thought I'd finally found someone who would put me first. He was handsome, ambitious, and he seemed to genuinely see me in a way my family never had. When he proposed after graduation, I felt like I'd won some cosmic lottery. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. Except my parents spent most of the reception talking to other guests about Jake's new job at Goldman Sachs and Emma's acceptance to art school. Even on my wedding day, I was background music to their more exciting stories. But Michael had chosen me. That was enough. For 15 years, it was enough. Until it wasn't. I hired Andrew Thompson from Elite Investigations on a Thursday morning in May. His office was in a nondescript building in White Plains, the kind of place you'd walk past without a second glance. Perfect for someone whose job was watching people without being noticed. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair," I told him, the words feeling surreal as they left my mouth. Andrew was probably in his 40s with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested he'd heard this story countless times before. He didn't judge or try to talk me out of it. He just pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Tell me what you've observed," he said. I laid it all out. The cologne, the workouts, the sudden interest in helping our neighbor, the secretive phone behavior. As I spoke, Andrew nodded occasionally, his expression never changing. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "About 2 months, since our neighbor moved in." "And you want surveillance on both your husband and the neighbor?" "Yes. I need to know what I'm dealing with." Andrew quoted his rates, $500 a day plus expenses. It would cost me at least $2,000 for a week of surveillance, money I'd have to carefully extract from our joint savings without Michael noticing. But I had to know. "One more thing," Andrew said as I was about to leave. "Are you prepared for what we might find? Sometimes the truth is worse than the suspicion." I thought about it for a moment. I've been living with suspicion for months. Whatever the truth is, it can't be worse than this. I was wrong about that. The truth was so much worse. Andrew called me 5 days later. "We need to meet," he said, his voice carrying a gravity that made my stomach drop. We met at the same coffee shop where this story began. a Starbucks in a strip mall 20 minutes from my house. Andrew arrived with the manila envelope that would change everything. "Your husband is definitely having an affair," he said without preamble. "I have photos of them together at a hotel in Stamford yesterday afternoon." The photos were exactly what you'd expect. Michael and Jennifer entering a Holiday Inn, kissing in the parking lot, her hand on his chest in a way that spoke of intimacy and familiarity. My hands shook as I flipped through them, but Andrew wasn't finished. "There's more," he said. "Your neighbor isn't who she claims to be." He pulled out a second set of documents. "Jennifer Walsh doesn't exist. At least, not the Jennifer Walsh living next door to you. The real Jennifer Walsh died in a car accident in Oregon 3 years ago." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the woman your husband is having an affair with is using a stolen identity, Haiti. Her real name is Rebecca Martinez, and she has a very interesting criminal history." He slid another document across the table, a criminal background check that made my blood run cold. Rebecca Martinez had been convicted of fraud, identity theft, and something called romance scamming. She'd served 18 months in federal prison and was currently on probation. "Romance scamming?" I whispered. "It's when someone creates a false identity to form romantic relationships for financial gain. They typically target wealthy, lonely, or vulnerable individuals and manipulate them into providing money, property, or other valuable assets." My mind raced. Michael wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but he made good money. We had substantial savings, investments, a house that was nearly paid off. If someone wanted to run a long-term financial scam, we'd be perfect targets. "There's one more thing," Andrew said gently. "Rebecca Martinez has been researching your husband for months. I found evidence that she specifically chose your neighborhood because she'd identified him as a target. This isn't a random affair. It's a calculated con." The coffee shop seemed to spin around me. My husband wasn't just cheating. He was being systematically manipulated by a professional criminal who had moved next door specifically to destroy our lives. Over the next 2 weeks, Andrew and I built a comprehensive file on Rebecca Martinez, the woman who had introduced herself as a divorced yoga instructor from California was actually a career criminal with a pattern of targeting middle-aged married men in affluent suburbs. Her method was always the same: research the target, move into the neighborhood, present herself as the perfect fantasy, attractive, interested, available. She would slowly seduce the husband while gathering financial information about the couple. The end game was always to convince the man to leave his wife and transfer assets to her control. According to Marcus's research, Rebecca had successfully pulled this scam at least 4 times in the past decade. Her victims had lost a combined total of over $3 million. One man in Connecticut had lost his house, his retirement savings, and his children's college funds before he realized what was happening. "The good news," Andrew told me, "is that we caught this early. She hasn't gotten him to transfer any major assets yet, but she's working on it." He showed me surveillance photos of Rebecca and Michael at a restaurant in New Canaan, her hand covering his while she leaned in close, speaking intently. There were photos of them looking at real estate listings on her phone. Photos of them at a bank where Michael was clearly filling out paperwork. "She's moving fast now," Andrew explained. "My guess is she's trying to get him to refinance your house or take out a large loan. Maybe convince him to invest in some fake business opportunity she's got lined up." That evening, I searched through Michael's desk and computer while he was at work. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Hidden in a folder labeled Tax Documents, I discovered printouts of our financial statements, mortgage information, and retirement account balances. There were also emails to a loan officer about exploring refinancing options for investment purposes. Michael was planning to bet our future on a woman who didn't even exist. I could have confronted Michael immediately, but I'd learned enough about manipulation tactics to know that wouldn't work. Rebecca had spent months conditioning him to see me as the enemy, the nagging wife who didn't understand him, who took him for granted, who stood in the way of his happiness and new life. Instead, I decided to be strategic. With Marcus's help, I developed a plan that would expose Rebecca's true identity in front of witnesses, making it impossible for Michael to deny the truth or for Rebecca to manipulate her way out of the situation. The opportunity came in June when Rebecca suggested hosting a neighborhood barbecue to bring everyone together. Michael volunteered our backyard without consulting me, another sign of how completely he'd fallen under her influence. "Perfect," I told Andrew when he called with an update. "We'll expose her in front of the entire neighborhood." I spent the week before the barbecue making careful preparations. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and learned that Rebecca was wanted for violating her probation. I compiled all of Marcus's evidence into a comprehensive file. I even reached out to 2 of Rebecca's previous victims, who agreed to provide statements about her methods. But most importantly, I hired a lawyer and quietly started the process of protecting our assets. Whatever happened at that barbecue, I wanted to make sure Rebecca couldn't take anything from us if Michael was too far gone to see reason. The neighborhood barbecue revelation. Saturday, June 15th, started like any other summer day in our perfect suburban neighborhood. Families began arriving at our house around 2 p.m. with covered dishes and folding chairs. Rebecca showed up fashionably late, wearing a flowing sundress that somehow managed to look both innocent and alluring. She worked the crowd like a professional, complimenting wives on their potato salad while flirting just enough with their husbands to make everyone feel special. I watched Michael follow her around like a lovesick teenager, refilling her wine glass and laughing too loudly at her jokes. At 4 p.m., as planned, Andrew arrived. I had introduced him to several neighbors as a friend from my book club, so his presence didn't seem unusual. What the neighbors didn't know was that he was wearing a wire, recording everything for potential legal proceedings. "Ladies and gentlemen," I called out, tapping a wine glass to get everyone's attention. Before we start the games, I wanted to share something interesting I learned about our wonderful new neighbor. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. Michael looked confused, but not concerned. He had no idea what was coming. "I've been doing some research on neighborhood safety," I continued, "and I discovered something fascinating about identity theft. Did you know that it's incredibly easy for criminals to assume the identities of deceased individuals?" Several neighbors nodded, thinking this was going to be a safety presentation. Rebecca's face had gone pale, but she was trapped by the crowd and social expectations. "For example," I said, pulling out a folder, "someone could take the identity of Jennifer Walsh, a woman who died in a car accident in Oregon 3 years ago, and use that identity to infiltrate a community for criminal purposes." The silence was deafening. Rebecca started to back toward the patio door, but Andrew had positioned himself to block her exit. "The real question," I continued, looking directly at Rebecca, "is what should we call you? Rebecca Martinez? Or do you prefer one of your other aliases?" The explosion that followed was everything I'd hoped for and dreaded. Rebecca immediately launched into denials, claiming I was crazy, jealous, making things up. But Andrew stepped forward with his badge and a folder of evidence that made her protests pointless. "Rebecca Martinez," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you're wanted for violation of federal probation related to fraud and identity theft charges." Michael's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, humiliation. 20 neighbors watched as the woman he'd been ready to leave his wife for was arrested in our backyard. But the real revelation came when Rebecca, handcuffed and facing additional charges, decided to take Michael down with her. "You think your husband is so innocent?" she screamed at me as the police led her away. "He knew exactly what he was doing. He was planning to leave you anyway. I just gave him an excuse and a plan to take half your money with him." The months that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, counseling sessions, and difficult conversations. Michael claimed he'd been manipulated, that he'd never intended to go through with any financial schemes, that he'd just been flattered by the attention of a younger woman. Some of that might have been true. Rebecca Martinez was a professional manipulator who had spent years perfecting her craft. But the emails I'd found, the secret meetings with loan officers, the hidden financial documents, those painted a picture of a man who had been willing to risk everything we'd built together for a fantasy. Our marriage couldn't survive that level of betrayal. But unlike Rebecca's previous victims, I had been prepared. The assets were protected, the evidence was documented, and I had witnesses to everything. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. Michael kept his pension and a small portion of our savings. I kept the house, the majority of our investments, and most importantly, my self-respect. Rebecca Martinez was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for violating her probation and multiple counts of fraud. The investigation into her activities led to charges in 3 other states. Michael was not charged criminally, but he faced professional consequences when his employer learned about his poor judgment in financial matters. Finding my voice. The most surprising thing about the whole experience was how empowered I felt afterward. For the first time in my life, I had been the one to take action instead of just accepting what was happening to me. I had investigated, planned, and executed a strategy that protected me and exposed the truth. The woman who had spent her childhood being overlooked and her marriage being taken for granted had found her voice in the most unexpected way. I used the experience to completely rebuild my life. My interior design business, which had been a hobby during my marriage, became a full-time career. Without the need to maintain the facade of a perfect suburban wife, I was free to take risks and pursue opportunities I'd never considered before. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I was featured in Westchester magazine for designing the home of a local celebrity. A year later, I had opened my own design studio and hired 2 employees. The business that had been dismissed as a little side project during my marriage was now generating more income than Michael's financial advisor's salary. But the real transformation was internal. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped dimming my accomplishments to make others comfortable, stopped accepting less than I deserved because I was afraid of being alone. The girl who had been invisible in her own family had become a woman who couldn't be ignored. The final confrontation. 2 years after the barbecue revelation, Michael came to my new office downtown. He looked older, grayer, diminished in a way that suggested the consequences of his choices had finally caught up with him. "I made a mistake," he said without preamble. "The biggest mistake of my life. Rebecca played me, and I was too stupid and too flattered to see it." I let him talk. He told me about the loneliness that had crept into our marriage, about feeling like we'd become roommates instead of lovers, about how Rebecca had made him feel young and desirable again. He apologized for the betrayal, for the financial schemes, for risking everything we'd built together. "I know you'll probably never forgive me," he concluded, "but I needed you to know that I realize what I lost. You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for a fantasy." I looked at this man I'd loved for 15 years, This man who had been willing to destroy our life together for a woman who didn't even exist and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just a kind of peaceful closure. "You're right," I said finally. "I probably won't forgive you. Not because I'm holding a grudge, but because forgiveness implies that what you did was forgivable. You didn't just cheat on me, Michael. You were willing to financially ruin us both for someone you'd known for 3 months. That's not a mistake. That's a fundamental character flaw." He started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'm not angry anymore," I continued. "I'm grateful. If Rebecca hadn't moved next door, I might have spent the rest of my life married to someone who could make that kind of choice. Now I know who you really are, and more importantly, I know who I really am." As he left my office that day, I realized that Rebecca Martinez had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my life, the truth about my marriage, and the courage to demand better for myself. Today, I live in a downtown loft that I designed myself. It's nothing like the suburban colonial with white picket fences that I thought represented success. This space is bold, modern, unapologetically feminine. Everything I couldn't be when I was trying to maintain the illusion of perfect domesticity. My business is thriving. I've designed homes for 3 celebrities, 2 politicians, and a tech entrepreneur whose Manhattan penthouse was featured in Architectural Digest. The woman who used to make excuses for her little hobby now has a waiting list of clients and a staff of 8. More importantly, I've learned to value myself in ways I never did before. I travel solo to design conferences in Paris and Milan. I've taken pottery classes and learned to speak Italian. I've discovered that I actually enjoy being alone, something I never knew because I'd never truly been alone before. I still live on Maple Street, in the same neighborhood where my marriage imploded. Some people might see that as refusing to move on, but I see it differently. This is my community. These are my friends, and I wasn't the one who did anything wrong. Why should I be the one to leave? The house next door, Rebecca's house, was eventually sold to a lovely family with twin toddlers. Sometimes I see the mother struggling with groceries and kids, and I bring over cookies or offer to help. Not because I want to be the perfect neighbor, but because I remember what it feels like to need support and not know how to ask for it. On the 3-year anniversary of the barbecue incident, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Patricia Goldman, one of Rebecca Martinez's previous victims in Connecticut. She had read about our case in the local newspaper and wanted to reach out. "I wanted to thank you," she wrote, "for doing what I couldn't. When Rebecca destroyed my marriage and stole my savings, I was too embarrassed and broken to fight back. I let her win. But watching how you handled the situation gave me the courage to rebuild my own life." Patricia had started her own business, a consulting firm for women going through divorce. She was using her experience with financial fraud to help other women protect their assets and avoid the traps she'd fallen into. Rebecca Martinez destroyed a lot of lives, Patricia's letter continued. But she also inadvertently created a network of stronger, wiser women who are now helping others. In a strange way, she made us all better than we were before. That letter made me realize something important. My story wasn't just about exposing a criminal or saving my marriage. It was about transformation, mine and apparently others. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalysts for becoming who we were always meant to be. Thank you for watching until the end. If you had been in my shoes that day when I first suspected something was wrong, what would you have done? Would you have hired a private investigator like I did? Or would you have confronted your husband directly? Would you have trusted your instincts, or would you have convinced yourself you were being paranoid? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious about how different people would handle a situation like this. And please subscribe to my channel for more stories about finding strength in impossible situations and learning that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best transformations. Remember, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. If someone seems too good to be true, they probably are. And most importantly, never let anyone, whether it's a spouse, a family member, or a con artist, make you feel like you're not worth protecting. The world is full of people who will try to take advantage of your kindness, your trust, or your desire to see the best in others. But it's also full of people who will help you fight back when you find the courage to stand up for yourself. I learned that I don't need someone else to make me feel valuable. I was valuable all along. I just needed to stop accepting less than I deserved and start demanding the respect I'd earned. And if my story helps even one person recognize the signs of manipulation or find the courage to investigate when something feels wrong, then maybe Rebecca Martinez did me a favor after all. She certainly didn't plan on creating a stronger, wiser, more successful version of me. But that's exactly what happened. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content about overcoming betrayal and finding your strength, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support means everything, and I love hearing from you in the comments. Until next time, remember, you're stronger than you think. You deserve better than you're settling for, and sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person you were always meant to be.